Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een, amma ba'd. Let's one more time renew our intentions. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our intentions to come here sincerely for His sake, to learn His religion and to be able to implement it and teach it to other people in our family and other people in society. Ameen. So cost plus and selling at cost. So cost plus is when you're selling something and you're declaring what your cost is actually going to be. So this is perfectly allowed, and people would do it for the reason of wanting to sell more products. So when you tell somebody that you're selling at cost, at your cost, they feel that, you know what, you're not making a huge profit margin, so they're more likely to buy your product. Now the condition is that this is only allowed in an item that is fungible. So we talked about that. The item that is fungible. Fungible means something that's easily replaced. That's not unique, like some old ancient sword where there's only one or two of them, or like a giant, pink diamond that's like, Kim Kardashian's, engagement ring or something like that, So, yeah, I know some of you are following that. I know you are, right? So it's a complete waste of time, but that's the reality of the situation, right? So something along those lines. It's not, if it has to be something that is fungible, easily replaceable. And the reason for that is in order to prevent deception from taking place, okay? The thing is, if something was not easily replaceable, then it's so difficult to say what your cost is, and it's difficult to call you out in case you're lying. So in case you're lying and say, this super 50 carat diamond or whatever, this thing, it cost me, $1 million. And actually it costs you $500,000. It's very hard to figure out because it's so rare. So something along those lines. You're allowed to add in the price of the delivery, cleaning price, upkeep price, and all of that. And you use the wording and you say, it cost me this much money. But you're not allowed to say, I bought it for this much money. Because you're buying it for something and your cost is different. Okay? Now if the buyer discovers that the seller has deceived him, so somebody has been deceived, then he can automatically reduce the price, or he's allowed to return the product. So this is a right that they have. So somebody goes and sells you an iPhone, for example, and says, my cost was $250. And then you find out, for sure you find out that in reality that was not the cost. The cost was actually $200, and the guy ripped you off. Now if you have not paid so far, you have the right to only pay him $200, and you don't have any obligation. Right? Now you don't just do this randomly, otherwise you'll get taken to court. But I mean, in a system where you have the right, and you should be getting that right, you can do that. Otherwise you have the right to return the product. Okay? So this is cost plus and selling at cost. And the reason why this is important, this is called murabaha, cost plus, and selling something at cost is called tawliya. Now you may ask, why in the world would somebody sell at cost? Cost plus means you're declaring your cost, and then you're selling the item with a little percentage of profit, 5% profit, 10% profit, whatever it may be. So why in the world would somebody sell something at cost? To get rid of it, right? To liquidate it. That may be one thing. There may be another reason. They might be getting a discount in some other way. So that you can get some kind of discount while saying that, and that doesn't count as part of your cost. And also perhaps to sell something really cheap in order to get you to buy other products from the same person. So so it's not like say it's theoretical, it never happens. People sell at cost on a regular basis. So it's something that's allowed as long as you're declaring it, as long as the item is fungible, easily replaceable, and as long as you're not lying. And if you're lying, this is what happens to you. Now this is really common, important transaction, murabaha, because this is the number one way of Islamic finance in terms of housing. In terms of housing, murabaha, using the murabaha model is the number way to finance a house. Right? So we're not going to be able to get into the details of Islamic finance in this class. We'll do it in another class, inshallah. But this is the most common model. So basically the model is somebody buys the house for you, all right? And you want a house, somebody says, I'm going to buy the entire house for you, and the house costs $500,000. So I'll buy it for you because you don't have the money, and then I'm going to sell it to you as murabaha. My cost was $500,000, you already know that, it's very clear, and I'm going to sell it to you at a profit rate of whatever, 50%, 100%, whatever it takes over a period of time. The problem in the model is that murabaha means you buy something and then you sell it to somebody, declaring your cost immediately. But a mortgage only works because you're selling it to them because they can't afford it themselves. So what you're doing is you're selling it to them over a 30-year period or over a 20-year period. So what happens is, the question now is, if you add in and you modify the cost, or you modify your profit margin based upon the amount of time that you're giving the person to pay, is this considered two separate contracts, and does this resemble interest? So that's really the discussion, which is going to be beyond the scope of this class. That's cost plus and selling at cost. Okay? I know everyone wants to talk about that, but that's going to be another topic. So the thing is, once you learn all the fundamentals of the main transactions, then it's a lot easier to understand all the modern transactions. Okay? The next is advance payment, what is called salam. Advance payment, now normally, advance payment means that you are going to pay for something and you're not going to receive the product until later. Now normally you don't do this, right? The normal procedure is, if you have something, then I pay you and you hand me the item over. Option number one. Option number two is, you hand me the item and I owe you the money now. That's also very common, right? So I'm going to pay you after a month. That's very common. But what's not common, or what seems to be out of the ordinary, is I'm going to pay you for something and you're not going to give it to me until later. So that's not a normal transaction. So normally that's something that wouldn't essentially be allowed, because it just seems weird. But in real practice, people use this all the time. People use this transaction all the time. So it's considered an exception to the general rule of Islamic transactions. So usually you'd hand over the product, but here you don't. So let's take an example. A product that's you want delivered later on, you can ask for payment immediately. So the product in this type of transaction has to be of a specified measure, a specified type. The delivery time must also be specified. So you see what's going on? Remember we talked about this idea of uncertainty in transactions? Gharar? No? Kind of? Okay, we talked a lot about it, right? We talked about the idea of uncertainty in transactions has to be removed to a certain extent in Islam, because there's too much room for deception when the uncertainty of a product, like remember we talked about, if you have a bag of change and I said, hey, I'm going to sell this bag of change to you for $5, you're not allowed to do that. But if it's a bag of dates or fruits, I can sell it to you for $5. And we talked about the reason being uncertainty. There's too much uncertainty involved. So the thing is, when you have a transaction which is an advance payment transaction, all right, there has to be a lot of certainty involved. Let me give you an example so you can come back and you can be with me in the class, because it looks like everyone is kind of gone right now. All right, no, let me start by telling you a joke, all right, just to wake all of you up. All right, somebody texted me this morning. So there's a Saudi family in Arabia, and they're watching TV, and they're watching the movie Thelma and Louise. All right, you've heard of the movie Thelma and Louise? Okay, and after 5 minutes, the movie's over. And the guy's like, the whole movie was only 5 minutes. And they say, yeah. The Saudi kingdom decided to edit out all the scenes where women were driving. Okay, so hopefully you're awake now. All right, so now let's get back to advance payment transactions. Okay, so an advance payment transaction is like you go to a tailor, right, and you give them some cloth or something like that, and you tell them, I want you to stitch this. Now they're allowed to charge you in advance, and they've not delivered any product to you yet. So you're actually paying for a product, but the product has not been delivered over to you yet. So this is an example. Or another example would be like, you go to a property, you go to a piece of land, and you say, you know what, okay, here they have a diagram for you. All right, and this is very common. And they say, we're building houses on this land, and you can buy it right now. But the house you're going to get the house obviously after it's built. So you pay for it now, but you're going to receive the product later on because it's being built. It's going to be built according to the specifications. This is what we call advance payment or salam payment. The reason why it's allowed, it's only allowed when the item is specified in certain ways. Number one, the delivery time needs to be specified. Number two, the specified measure and the type of product has to be specified as well. Otherwise, there could be too much uncertainty, because you know what's going to happen? If you go and say, okay, I want you to make me a pair of pants, and I'm going to pay you in advance for it. So then the guy goes, he puts in his effort, makes you a pair of pants, and then all of a sudden delivers it, and you say, hey, this is XXL. I wear small. Well, you didn't specify that. That's not my problem. So he said, I'm not going to pay you for this. He said, well, I put in my effort and that cost me money, so you're going to take this pair of pants. Do you see the problem? So it has to be specified. If you say, you know what, I can sell you a 2-story house, you know, and we're building it on this land, only $200,000. That's great, man. 2-story house for $2,000? And then the guy goes and he builds like this tiny little, 400 square foot house, which has 2 stories in it. You say, that's not what I was expecting. So because someone else is investing their effort to do something, there can be deception on either side. So this contract needs to be specified as much as possible. So there's an extra level of specificity that's needed in order to prevent uncertainty, and uncertainty can lead to deception, right? Or problems or conflicts or something like that. Okay, so this is an exception. So specify everything. Delivery time also needs to be specified. So if you say, look, you know what, that pair of pants needs to be ready for tomorrow because I have a banquet to attend. And then all of a sudden the guy delivers it, 2 weeks later. You say, I needed the pants at that time, I'm not going to pay you. You say, well, I put the money in, I put the effort in, you have to take it. That's why there needs to be a specified delivery time. Right? So you don't want a house that's built 10 years later. You want a house that's built in the time frame that you need it. So let's take some examples. Some examples you need to specify everything in detail, and some examples you don't need to specify in detail. So let's take a classical example like firewood. So are you allowed to sell a bundle of firewood through advance payment without specifying the number of pieces or how thick the things would be? So let's say you say, look, someone says, I need a bundle of firewood. And the guy goes, look, man, I got an axe and I'm going to go and chop it. I'm going to bring it back. So how much does a bundle of firewood cost? Oh, firewood, one bundle, $10. Okay, I'll take it. $10. I want you to go chop me a thing, tie it up, give me a bundle, and I'm going to use it for the winter time. Right? Does anyone ever use firewood? I lived in a village in France, so we use firewood. Right? So it's common, right? I think it's not very common anymore over here. So what's going to happen if the guy goes and says, okay, he comes back, and he comes back with like 3 little tiny sticks and wraps them up and tries to give them to you and say, that's $10. All right? And you say, no, I was expecting like this bundle. That's what bundle means for me. You have a problem. This type of transaction is not allowed. You're not allowed to even get into this type of transaction because it's going to lead to a dispute. So Islam puts certain conditions in place that as a Muslim, you are obligated to follow this so that there's no problem. And you say, well, what if I'm not an argumentative person, I'll take whatever I get. That's not the point. This is for your own good and for the good of the seller. So you have to specify as much as possible. You specify how many pieces. You specify how thick the pieces should be. What else would you want specified? The type of wood? Absolutely. What else? It doesn't have to be weight necessarily, right? So the thing is, it's not to make life difficult. A lot of people don't check weight in firewood, right? But you want to specify like kind of the length, how long it's going to be, how just approximate how much is going to be, you're going to be getting, right? What kind of cut it's going to be, all of that. So depending on the product, the amount of specification differs. All right? So if I tell you, I'm going to sell you an iPhone for $100. So, oh, an iPhone for $100. Well, which iPhone? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Which one is it? Don't know. So you have to specify as much as possible. Whatever cannot be described or measured precisely is not allowed to be sold in an advance payment transaction. Something you're not allowed to specify or you're not able to specify because it's just a type of product where you can't really measure it properly, then you're not allowed to sell it through this advance payment due to increased risk of deception. Okay? Next is collateral. So what does collateral means? Collateral is a deposit that is placed with someone as a security against a loan. Okay? So this is quite common in society. So if someone's going to loan me $100, I say I need $100. I need a loan for a month. Say, okay, I'll loan you $100, but I don't trust you that much. What if you just jump in the car and you move to another state, or I never hear from you again, or something like that? What do? Say, well, as protection, I want you to leave your watch with me. Your watch looks pretty nice. Okay, I want you to leave your watch with me, and that watch might be worth $80. It might be worth $120. Whatever it is, you say, I feel more comfortable if you were to leave that with me because you have no money and you need money. I'll give you $100. But if you run away with my money, that watch is mine. Right? Now, usually you want to take a collateral that's going to be enough to cover the loan. So if the watch is $120, you just lost a $120 watch by trying to run away and not paying me my debt. So this type of collateral is allowed in Islam, and it's very, very common in many societies. So you're allowed to do that. Now there's a few conditions. Number one, it has to be done by mutual consent. Okay, now you'd think, okay, that's kind of obvious, but the whole gangster mentality, when you go and say, look, I'm going to give you $10,000, but at the same time, I'm taking this car from you now. And then they go and they just take your car away or something like that. You can't force somebody. Someone has to voluntarily give up collateral, right? So if you want the transaction, it has to be done by mutual consent, number one. And one of the other conditions is, it has to be fully owned by the person who's giving it up. So if I'm a partner with somebody else and say, you know what, half of this watch belongs to me, half of this watch belongs to somebody else, you're not allowed to go and put it up and say, okay, I'm going to put this up as collateral with somebody else, because they own half of it. You can't go and you put you take your wife's jewelry and say, I'm going to go, and I'm going to put this is the jewelry we have in the house, and then go put it up as collateral to go get a loan without her consent, because it's hers and it belongs to her. So you're not allowed to do something like that. So it has to be fully owned by you before you can put it up. Now let's talk a little bit more. The pledge or the collateral that you put up, it may be canceled by the owner of the item before it's handed over. So we talked about economic contracts, right? We talked about once you make a deal with somebody, the deal is done, you have an obligation to finish the transaction because you made a promise. The same thing does not apply when it comes to collateral. So for example, if you say, okay, you're going to give me $100, I'm going to give you my watch. And then all of a sudden, before you're about to engage in it, you're about to give over the watch, so you know what, I've changed my mind. I'm not willing to part with this watch anymore. This watch is too dear to me, and I've taken it back. You can do that. So you can cancel the collateral before you hand it over. But once you've handed it over, you cannot cancel the collateral anymore because you took the money from the other person. So once it's done, then that person gets to keep that item or the object until the debt is completely paid off. And you cannot say, I changed my mind, please just give me my watch back, I will give you my computer instead. That person doesn't have any obligation to give you your watch back. They've taken it and it's there, it's theirs for the time. But what responsibilities do they have? The new owner is responsible for any damage that is caused to the collateral. So if they go and they're playing around and they drop the watch, or they have that phone and all of a sudden, they're looking at it and they say, oh, I really like this phone, and they drop it and the glass breaks. Who's responsible? The new owner is responsible. All right, so if it's damaged, if it's destroyed, what do you do? How do you make a modification? There's two things you can do. Either you reduce the value of the item from the debt. So let's say it's an $80 watch. Say, okay, it was a $100 debt, $80 watch. Now you only owe me $20. So we already kind of valued the item. You owe me $20. Everyone agrees. Everything's fine. No problem. Or if the value was more than the debt, then he has to pay the person the money back. So if you have a $120 watch and you have a $100 debt, that guy owes you $20 now, and you still owe him $100, but he has to pay you on the spot, or as soon as possible, right? So he has to pay off the collateral. The new owner is not allowed to not allowed to benefit from the item unless he does not, or his using the item does not significantly reduce its value. So for example, you give somebody, or your wife agrees, and you give her jewelry to somebody else as collateral for a loan. Is that person's wife or that person who took it, for example, are they allowed to wear that jewelry? Yes, they are. Absolutely. And if you give your watch, they're allowed to wear that watch. Because wearing jewelry or wearing a watch does not significantly reduce the item. So that's the whole point. It's in their possession for a reason, so they're allowed to go ahead and use that. Say, well, this is my watch now. Or this is my jewelry. It's not theirs like permanently, but I'm allowed to use that. But if you have something which is going to significantly reduce that item, right? Like let's say, I can't think of a better example. Let's say you gave somebody a box of like coffee, right? And then all of a sudden, can they go and start using some of that coffee? No, because it's reducing the value of the product, right? Now, if you take something which can reduce the value, but not significantly, and you are able to restore that back to its original form, then they're allowed to use it. So for example, a car. So if you give somebody a car as collateral, and they go and they drive a few miles, but they're filling up the gas and everything like that, no major mileage being incurred, they're allowed to use that car. Okay, but if they're going to go and take a cross-country trip, or drive all the way down cross-state or something like that, then the mileage is obviously reducing the value of the car. They're not allowed to do that. Or if you go and you say, okay, I have the car, and you say, I just drove it, to my friend's house. Well, you use the gas. That gas didn't belong to you. That doesn't come with part of the collateral. So you've devalued the car due to the gas that was in the tank. It's going to be a whole different scenario. So you cannot mess with the collateral such that it's going to devalue it. But at the same time, you're allowed to use it as long as you're not going to be devaluing the item. Okay, so that's collateral. Any questions on these things so far? Yeah, you should specify it. So collateral is better to specify in part of the contract. But if this is all relating to if it's unspecified, what rights do you have? Yes. So if you make that as part of the contract, then it would be permissible. Right? Because technically it's not really more of an advance payment, it's more of a collateral. So you're saying that I get to live in this house, and I get temporary ownership of this house while I'm giving you this debt, while I'm giving you this loan. So yeah, that's like a collateral transaction. So as long as it's agreed to and the person is fine utilizing that, then it's okay. But the same principles of collateral will apply. So if he damages the house while living in it, it's his responsibility. He cannot put it back on the other person. So he cannot transfer a liability over to the person and say, I'm free from liability, but I'm going to be using the product. Right? So that's a principle that Prophet ﷺ specified, al-kharaju bil-daman, which means when you're giving something out, it comes with the responsibility of that item being used. No, okay, so yeah, if you know that the person cannot pay you back and then you ask them for a really high collateral, yeah, then that's like a form of deception. That's a form of like trying to take his computer. So what he's saying is, he knows that I need $100 and I have this computer, but he's going to try and give me the $100 knowing I can't pay it back, and then I can go. Well, usually that would not happen, because that person has to be really, really dumb, because they could take the computer and sell it on Craigslist for $800 rather than taking $100 from you and losing it. So it's not likely to happen, but that would be unethical of you. It would be unethical of you. Right. Time frame, yeah. Yeah, time frame is, in loans, time frame is there. But the difference is when the time frame elapses, what happens? You cannot increase the payment. There's no interest in Islam. So if the time frame goes, what's going to happen? If the guy can't pay you, he can't pay you. We're going to talk about what happens. The question is, if you are asking for a loan of $100, or you're loaning somebody $100, can you ask for an item which has a higher value than $100? Right? Yeah, you're allowed to do that. But, it's probably not the nicest thing to do. It just depends on how much you trust the person. If the person is really, really unreliable, and you know that they're unreliable, and they're going to give you an item which has a high value, but you can't sell it, right? So he's going to give you like a Persian rug that's worth $1,000, but you don't have time to find a buyer who's going to spend $1,000 on a Persian rug. So for you in your site, that's such a difficult item to sell. It's such a hassle for you to sell it. You can ask for the $1,000 Persian rug in exchange for $100 as collateral. You can do that because That's all the guy has. So yeah, you can do that. I mean, so your intention should be clear. Your intention is you're not trying to steal the guy's collateral. That should never be the intention. If that's the intention, then it's unethical, it's wrong. But if your intention is you just don't trust this guy and he has nothing else to offer. You know, people on Craigslist today, they have like the most ridiculous things to like offer, and they're like, I'll trade you this, I'll trade you this. And you're like, no one wants that stuff. It's like a bunch of junk. I mean, who's gonna get this stuff? So you take a bunch of all of that stuff and you say, okay, fine, I'll give you the loan, but I'll take all this junk that you have. I don't know what in the world, I can't really use it. I'm not gonna be able to sell it, but I'll take it. Maybe, you know, I'm gonna take more of it to guarantee that you actually pay me my money back. So that's that. As long as your intention is not to steal somebody's collateral. Okay, so it's not a transaction where you're trying to rip the guy off. It's your response. So if you wear the jewelry and somebody steals jewelry from you, it's your problem. You have responsibility of that now. So if it's due to negligence or whatever it is, so oh, accidentally, you know, it fell into the trash can and I lost it or whatever. That's your problem. It fell into the toilet or something like that. You're allowed to, yeah, you're allowed to use it. Otherwise, you know, you're not only just sitting with it. So you're allowed to use it unless the person stipulates in the contract, I don't want you touching my stuff. You can do that. This is all relating to if there is nothing in the contract and you make the thing, then the person says, okay, now Islamically, am I allowed to touch this or I'm not allowed to touch this? Islamically, you're allowed to, unless they specified in the contract. Okay, so if you give somebody a watch worth $120 as collateral in return for a $100 loan, and that person completely destroys your watch, it's finished, all right? He loses it. So now what happens? He forgives your loan and he has to give you $20 on top of that. So the whole point of murabaha, cost plus sale, you have to declare what the cost is. Otherwise, it's not a murabaha contract anymore. It's a normal sale contract. So if you're just selling, if I'm selling you this and I say, look, hey, I'll sell you this for $40. Fine, sold. That's a normal transaction. If I say, you know what, I'll sell you this for $40 and my cost was $30. You know exactly that I'm only making $10 profit. That's the whole, that becomes a cost plus transaction. Why would somebody do that? It's very common because let's say he's selling the same thing and he says, look, I'm selling you something similar, right? And I'm selling it to you for 50. And I tell him, you know what? I'm selling you for 60. Mine is more expensive, but I paid $50 for it. I'm only making $10. I bet you that guy is probably making $20. So I'm giving you a better product. I'm making less money than he's actually making. He's not even going to tell you how much he's making. I'm going to be very honest with you. I'm telling you how much I'm making, so you know I'm not ripping you off. I'm giving you a very good deal, actually. That's why you do it, and you'd sell more products that way. Okay, so here's the thing. If you're trying to help people buy houses, why would you make a profit? You're helping yourself then, right? No, that's what I'm saying. So we're not gonna discuss the details of the Islamic finance, but what I'm saying is, in essence, cost plus, we understand what a cost plus is. When you add the other variable of my profit changes based upon the amount of time in a cost plus transaction, does it remain like a normal cost plus transaction, or it changes such that? The question is, yeah, does it resemble interest? 100% it resembles interest. Does it equal interest such that it's also prohibited? That's a debate among scholars. And that's the whole, you know, do you look at the spirit of the law or the letter of the law? The letter of the law says it's a different transaction. The spirit of the law says there's no difference between this and interest. It's almost the same thing. Right. So there's a difference. A bank is not there to help you. A bank is there to help themselves. So if somebody says, I'm here to help you, right? Either they're lying to you or they're going to sell you literally that I buy for $500,000 this house, I sell it to you over a period of 30 years for $500,000. That's when you're helping somebody, right? That's when you're helping them and you're not harming yourself because you get your money back, right? If you want to help someone even more, you go ahead and you say, I'm going to sell it to you for $250,000. Then you're helping them, but you're harming yourself, meaning you're losing yourself. If you're benefiting yourself and say, you know, I'm going to do you a favor and I'm going to sell it to you for only $1 million over 30 years. You're not benefiting them really. You're actually doing the service to yourself. So we need to be very clear about, you know, if otherwise any banker can tell you, you know, I'm doing you a favor by giving you a loan, 18% APR. How are you doing me a favor? You're not doing me a favor. Even if you put 1% interest, you're not doing me a favor. Don't say you're doing me a favor by reducing, because in American society, if you give somebody a loan and you say, I'm only going to charge you 1% interest, American-wise, secular-wise, you're doing them a favor, because normally you'd have to pay 5, 10, 20% interest. Islamically, if you charge 0.001% interest, you didn't do them a favor. All right, that's it. That talks about the history of interest. All you need to do is look at historical societies. How did all these empires function? How is it that even in Europe, even the Catholic Church had banned interest the entire time? When the Jews started practicing interest in the United Kingdom, or London and all these areas, they kicked them out for 200 years. So we don't want you practicing interest in our place. And these places, they survived. Right? They were fine. How did the Muslim empire establish itself? How did Spain flourish? How did Egypt flourish? How did Iraq and Baghdad flourish? All of them flourished without interest. All right? So the thing is, it's not that it doesn't work. So when you explain to someone, give them a whole picture. We could have a whole seminar on that one. Okay, so if he gave her jewelry away without asking the wife, now he has. Well, that's stealing, actually. Yeah. No, that's. Then he told her afterwards, right? So to be nice. To be nice, she should ask him to buy her, pay her back. And if she didn't want to be nice, then she could take him to court and say he stole, and then his hand could be cut off or something like that. It's a sin on him, yeah. So now he owes the guy and he owes his wife. So he has a double debt now. If it is murabaha, that's fine. But if it depends on what the contract really entails. No, but this is not always a cost issue. There may be other fees involved. So sometimes they're adding, broker's fee or banker's fee or whatever it may be. So it depends on what the fee is. If the fee is murabaha, if it's cost plus, then yeah, it's fine. They can add whatever fee they want. Then it's allowed. Yeah, then it's allowed. But it depends. You see, transactions today are so complicated. There's so many people adding in different things or making, different derivatives and all of that. So you have to be very careful and understand what you're actually getting into. Because that's going to determine whether the contract is allowed or not. Okay, so it's important to look at the details. Restrictions on a person's legal competence. This is known as al-hajar. Hajar basically means to put a barrier in somebody's path. This refers to someone we're talking about economic transactions mainly here, right? So this refers to who's not allowed to utilize the money that they actually own, but they're somehow stopped and prevented from doing something or engaging in a transaction or making a contract or something like that. So Islamically, everyone, whether male or female, white or black, Arab or non-Arab, they generally have the right to dispose of property. This is called the right to dispose of property in law. Meaning you own something, this belongs to me, this laptop belongs to me, this podium belongs to me. I could do whatever I want with it. I can give this away as a gift to someone. I can take this and I can throw it in the trash, and I can take this and I can give it as collateral to somebody else or sell it. I have the right of disposal. So this may seem like, oh, okay, that's obvious, right? It's not obvious, because what you don't realize is historically, this was such an important thing. Historically, not every civilization has given females the right to dispose of property. Not every civilization has given people of other religions the right to dispose of property if they're a minority religion. Not everyone has given other races the right to dispose of property, like in America, right? People who are not from the rich, from the white middle class. The Constitution says life, liberty, pursuit. The Constitution says, what's the main part? The freedom for all people and all of that. That didn't apply to all people. It applied to a certain class of people, right? So this didn't apply throughout history. But so in Islam, when we say everyone, male or female, Arab or non-Arab, regardless of their religion even, Jew, Christian, Magian, pagan, they all have the right to dispose of their property as they see fit, then that is a major actually breakthrough in history. So we kind of take it for granted, but if you look at his societies in the past, it wasn't there across the board. Right? And we saw some already in our history class, right? So the history people should know this. Where were Jews not allowed to own property, for example? Spain, right? We saw that, and we're going to see more examples, inshallah. So in other places as well. So everyone has the right to dispose of property, except two categories of people: minors, people who are children, they're not reached the age of maturity yet, and people who are mentally handicapped. And people who are mentally ill, they don't have the full, functioning minds. They don't get the right of disposal. Now, what is the reason for that? The reason for that is if they were given the right of disposal, what would happen? They'd be losing their property, If a child has, $1 million in his hand, and somebody offers him, hey, you know what? It's the best candy you've ever seen. So, okay, got it. He's handed over, right? It's gone. Same thing with someone who has the mind like of a child. It's going to be a problem. So for their own good, they don't have the right of disposal. But what are some of the obligations that we need to talk about? If they ruin property, so if your child ruins property, or someone who is mentally handicapped, he ruins somebody's property, are they held accountable? Yes. They're held accountable for compensating that property. So if someone who is mentally handicapped and has a lot of money in his possession, in his bank account or whatever it is, the person who's administering that money, who's responsible for that person? It's going to come out of his own wealth, right? Now, if a child doesn't have wealth in their own possession or whatever it may be, and they do something, who's responsible for that? The parents, right? So if somebody's praying and they happen to have their glasses in front of them, and some child comes and steps on the glasses, this happens a lot to me. So who is responsible for that? It's the parents, right? They're responsible. That's why this is, huh? Yeah. Keep it in the pocket. Give me a break, man. The pocket is as dangerous as being on the floor, actually. But yeah, so there's a sense of responsibility. So if a child goes and ruins some kind of property or something like that, they're responsible. Same thing will apply. We may not cover it in this class, although I wanted to. Things like if you own an animal, this is really important for Americans, and the animal goes and attacks somebody else, that person is responsible, and they're going to be held accountable. And in American law, unfortunately, they're not. So you have people's pit bulls go and attack somebody else. Many people get injured or die even from like dog bites and stuff like that. Islamically, that person is held accountable. So much so that if somebody dies, then guess what? Retaliation punishment is going to be put onto the owner of that person, on the animal or whatever, as long as they didn't do their best to try and keep it, in a cage or escape from the cage or something like that, if it's due to their negligence. So anyways, if they ruin property, they are held accountable for compensation. Now minors may dispose of their property with the permission of their guardian. Okay, so they don't have 100% right, but let's say, it was Eid time and your child gets like $200 from all the uncles and the aunties and everything, and they're so happy and they have the cash and you let them keep it. Now, can they walk into a store? We just said they don't have the right of disposal. Can they walk into a store and buy some candy? So it depends, right? Now, in today's society, I don't know exactly what American law is, but let's say they come to the masjid and you have somebody outside and they're selling some food. And then the person goes and takes like $5 and goes and buys some of the food. The kid buys some of the food. Now the question is, if they didn't have the right of disposal, then what's going to happen? When the kid comes back with the food and says, hey, look, mom, I bought a slice of pizza for $5, right? It was my money. I got the money from all the people. I have $200. So if they don't have the right of disposal, then if the parent says no, you go back to the shop owner and say, what in the world were you thinking? How could you sell my child, this food? It's just a child. You can't take the child's money. Now, in this case, you're thinking, this is not a big deal. Child wanted some pizza or something like that. That's fine. Now, let's say the person is selling like one of these, right? And then all of a sudden, he goes and takes $200 from the kid and he sells him a laser pointer or, a switch or whatever. All the kid's money is gone. So he's only allowed to do it with one condition, and that is with the permission of their guardian. So if the guardian has given permission, then the transaction counts. If the guardian didn't give permission, you have to differentiate between two things. One of them is it haram, meaning is it Islamically unacceptable? And two, is it invalid? There's a world of difference. right? So if you go and the kid buys this for $200, in the masjid in the back at somebody's table, and they say, oh, well, you know what? I took the money and I sold it. Well, the transaction is done. I'm going to go and ask Allah for forgiveness. Or, I have a sheikh and he said, it's okay what I did, or whatever it is. That's meaning if it's haram, then that person says, okay, I'm going to, ask Allah for forgiveness, but, I already spent the money. The $200, I already went and, bought something else in the meantime while your child was going and telling you about the transaction and you came back. When we say it's invalid, it means that person has to give the money back no matter what. If you have to turn him over and, shake it out of his pocket, I mean, not like that, obviously, but I mean, he has no choice but to give the money back. The transaction never counted in the first place. That money was never transferred, which means that money, if it's in the possession of the person, that's not his money. So he's stealing if he keeps it in his pocket. We understand the difference between, valid and invalid? Even if it's haram, it can be valid. And it can be haram and invalid. So two different things. So transactions of minors and mentally handicapped are not valid because they don't own the right to dispose property unless a child who has the permission of his guardian transacts. Then it's allowed. So now how would this usually happen? There's two ways. Either before the fact or after the fact. Before the fact means that you're standing in line and you tell the shop owner, look, my son is going to buy whatever he wants from you. And he has the money, so just go ahead and sell it to him. And then you walk away, the child goes and buys whatever, walkie-talkies or whatever, something, and comes back and says, look, mom, this is what I bought. The permission was already given. If the permission was given, the transaction takes place. They don't have a right of return if the seller said, no, there's no right of return. All sales are final. Because the permission was given from the guardian. The second way is, the permission is the child goes and buys something, tells the parents, and the parents say, okay, that's fine, no problem. I don't mind that you bought, slice of pizza or whatever it was. And then later on, if the owner of the business finds out, how could you sell to that kid? Go get the money back. And he says, no, the transaction took place because the parent approved it. Whether the parent approves before or the parent approves after, either one of them, the transaction becomes valid. Okay? Why is this restriction here? We talked about the restriction is there so that the minor will not get abused. But at the same time, the minor is not going to be restricted from performing any type of transactions. So let's say you have like a traditional society, you have a store next door, and you tell your child, go buy some milk from the store. Now if you know the store owner and say, look, whenever my child comes, buy some milk, you sell it to him. Or whatever, he comes with some money, go and buy, he can buy whatever he wants in the store. That's fine. So, but to prevent abuse, so you want to prevent abuse, but you don't want to make life difficult either. Otherwise the store owner says, well, no, Islamically, you don't have the right of disposal, therefore I cannot sell you anything. But my mom just sent me with the money. That's your problem. You tell the mom, to come down here herself, and if she doesn't come here, we're not selling you anything. That would make life difficult, right? So Islam brings this balance, protects the children and protects the wealth, as well as doesn't make life unnecessarily difficult. Also, when a minor or a mentally handicapped person engages in a transaction and two things occur. They intend the transaction and they understood what was happening, then the guardian of that person can either endorse the transaction or cancel the transaction. Right? So after it's already taken place. So this applies to someone who's a guardian over someone who's maybe mentally not fully capable, or a child. So let's say a child was given a gift of a cell phone, right? And then somebody on the street says, hey, I'm going to trade you that phone for my phone, right? So if the child intended and understood what was going on, and they trade the phones, and then the parent comes to find out later on that, look, this is the trade that was made. That guy traded my phone for this phone. The parent can either approve or can say, no, this transaction is canceled. I don't know, you got ripped off. We're going to go back and we're going to cancel this transaction. Everyone has to return the products back. This is allowed. So they can transact in property with the permission of their guardian. Okay. Now, what is maturity? Maturity, we talked about this in the previous class, so I'll mention it a little bit again. A boy is considered to be a mature adult when he has his first wet dream or first ejaculation. And if he doesn't have any of those before the age of 15, then the moment he reaches the age of 15, he becomes mature. A girl is similar in that she becomes mature when she has either her first wet dream or equivalent, or she begins her menstrual period. And if none of those occur before the age of 15, then she's considered to be mature. Now, Imam Abu Hanifa has a different opinion. He doesn't like the age of 15. He says for males, it should be the age of 18. Right? And he says for females, it should be the age of 17. So he has his own opinion, but the majority of scholars are going with the age of 15. Usually in our society, most boys and girls reach the age of maturity before the age of 15 due to several factors. Weather factors, propaganda factors, all these videos that are marketed as factors, all of that. So they're considered to be mature. What does it mean to be mature? It means that they're going to be held responsible for everything. They're going to be treated like adults now. So this person is a full-fledged adult now, in the sense that if they steal, they're going to be treated like an adult. If they transact, they're going to be treated like an adult. If they want to get married, they're going to be treated like an adult. Everything, that person now is an adult. Now, if it's difficult to determine whether someone has actually reached the age of maturity or not, you can't always check, or you can't always find out exactly that this happened. What do? If that person says that yes, I've reached the age of maturity because one of these things have happened, then that person's word is accepted. Okay, now why would you do this? Meaning that, if somebody comes in a store and says, hey, I want to buy that item for $100 and it's my money, I'm buying it. Someone says, you look like a little kid. I can't sell you this item. You're like a little child. He says, no, I'm not a child. I am 8 years old and I already reached maturity. And he says, what do? So yes, his word is to be taken. So if he gives his word and he says, no, I've reached the age of maturity and that's what I am, and it obviously it's not like a 5-year-old or something that you can kind of tell that it's kind of like difficult to determine, that person's word is taken. Now if they come back later on and their parents say, oh, didn't you know my child has not reached the age of maturity? He said, no, he said that he did and he looks like he might have not. His word is taken into consideration. He's treated like an adult. If he commits a crime, he's treated like an adult. Everything his word is accepted. Okay? So that's a legal competence. Bankruptcy. All right? If somebody declares bankruptcy, and so what is bankruptcy? Means that you declare that you have no money, you have nothing to pay. So if you declare bankruptcy and your creditors are demanding payment, so you say I have no money to pay and you owe people money. Someone who gives you a loan and you have to pay them back, they're called a creditor. So your creditors or a creditor, whatever, gave you a loan, you need to pay them back now, and you say, I have no money. I have nothing to pay you back with. What happens? That person is taken into custody. The guy who owes money, he's taken into custody, meaning he's like kind of arrested and taken in by the police, and his assets are frozen. Okay? So Imam Abu Hanifa, he had a different opinion. He said, yes, he's taken into custody, but his assets are not frozen. Now the reason why there's a difference between the two is, if you're taken into custody because you say that you don't have any money, if you didn't really have any assets, or you had assets but you couldn't liquidate them, meaning you couldn't get rid of them in order to pay your creditors back, what's going to happen is your business may get messed up if your assets get liquidated, if they get frozen. So now let's say you're running a business and the judge says, you know what, all your bank accounts are terminated, frozen. What's going to happen to your business and all the other things you're doing? It's going to become a problem. You need that business to run properly so that you can eventually make the money to pay your creditors back. So this is what Imam Abu Hanifa was saying. And his students differed with him and they said, no, we freeze his assets as well, because this person can go and transfer money out in order to make it look like he's completely bankrupt when he actually has assets. And the creditors, the people who he owes money to, they get number one priority. They deserve this money now. This money belongs to them. He made an agreement, I'm going to pay you after a year. The year has passed. Now someone has to get involved to make sure this money transfers over to them. It's their money. Okay, so this is where bankruptcy comes into play. So if the person has wealth of his own, meaning he has money, he's in custody now, and the money belongs to him. It's his own money, right? Or he has money that he had borrowed from other people, and it's sitting in his house. So he borrowed whatever item from somebody else, and it's sitting in his house. That person, what happens is an investigation takes place. You go and you search his house, you go and you check his bank records, you go and you check everything. If he has money, whether it's borrowed or whether it's his own money, he remains in custody until the debts are discharged. He has to pay off the debts, otherwise he's going to remain in custody. If he has no money and he's being honest in the fact that he's completely bankrupt, then he's obviously not going to be able to, he's not going to sit in jail, because he's not going to be able to work in jail in order to ever make money to pay off the debt. So then he's removed from there. Okay, so the whole point of taking him into custody is to determine, is this guy lying and claiming to be bankrupt? In reality he is not. Or is he telling the truth that he really has no money? That's what needs to be determined, and that's why a person is taken into custody. Okay. So the next one is confession and acknowledgement, which is called iqrar. Okay, confession and acknowledgement. And by the way, all of these chapters that we're covering, you'll find that most people, even people who study Islam in a lot of depth and everything, they've never gone through any of these chapters. Yet, if you look at most books of Islamic law, as well as most books of hadith, you look at Bukhari, you look at Muslim, you look at Tirmidhi, you look at all these books, they all have chapters like Iqrar and Ijara and Murabaha and all of that. They all have that, and hadith are organized according to these chapters. So it's actually very important to, the only reason I'm throwing the Arabic term in there is so that if you're ever going to go back and look at one of these books, you'd know what we're talking about in case they don't give you the same translation. Okay, so confession and acknowledgement, known as iqrar, this is when a sane adult, right? Obviously you have to be sane, you have to be an adult. When you acknowledge a right against yourself, okay, when you acknowledge something. So what is a right against yourself? If you acknowledge that you have a debt. So you say, okay, you know what? I admit that I owe this brother $100. Or if you acknowledge that you committed a crime. I admit that I stole this thing from somebody else. If you say something like that, right, is it binding or it's not binding? Right, it's binding. So that's the whole point of iqrar. It is binding, regardless of whether anyone else knows about it or not. So if you admit that I went and I did this such and such thing, then you are now accountable for that according to your own word. So if the other guy says, you know, I don't remember you owing me $100, and then, you know what? He says, no, I do. 1 week later, the guy says, you know what? I really need that $100 you owe me. And the other guy says, you know what? I think I wasn't really, you know, I think I drank too much coffee at that time or something. I wasn't really in a good mood, you know. So I take that back. You cannot take it back. So the moment you acknowledge, you made an acknowledgement yourself, you are responsible for that thing that you've acknowledged. So you're acknowledging a right against yourself, basically. So like, you know, acknowledging money. Now if the creditor comes along and says, okay, yes, you admitted that you owe me $100, but now I remember it was actually $150. So you have to you have to pay me $150. Whose word takes precedence? The one who's acknowledging. As long as they're made to swear. So they're going to be swearing an oath, and their word is going to be taken. Because they made the acknowledgement. Okay, so because they made the acknowledgement, the word is taken. If a person acknowledges a debt during a terminal illness, which leads to his death, what's called the final illness. Final illness means you're in a major illness and you end up dying. Now, at the time, you don't know whether you're going to die or you're not going to die, right? So you cannot tell. When you're alive, it's called terminal illness. When you die, people look back at it and they say this was his final illness because he actually died. So why does this matter? It matters because if someone acknowledges a debt during their terminal final illness where they actually end up dying, then the question is, if he has debts, all right, and some of the debts were acknowledged while he was in that state of terminal illness, in which he died, and he has other debts which he acknowledged when he was in good health. The question is, which creditors get preference? Who gets to collect their money from his inheritance if his inheritance money that he leaves behind is limited, that only the money can go to one or the other of them? Who gets precedence? The one who had, when he acknowledged in good health. Now why is that? That's because it's assumed that there's a possibility that he only made the acknowledgement when he wasn't fully thinking properly because he was in his terminal illness, which was leading to his death. People do a lot of strange things during that time. So that's why the precedence will go to the other person with all the debts that he acknowledged. So this is kind of a rare, in fact, yeah, probably I would have left this out. But anyways, so like these kind of issues, you say it's like really rare. Okay, like all books of Islamic law, they're full of all of these issues basically. So I'm trying to trim all of these down for you. One of them, it slipped in, so I apologize. It's just slipped in there somehow. But otherwise, I've been cutting out all of these kind of things. Lease. Okay, the next is lease, what's known as ijara. So lease is like renting. It's a contract. The definition is, it's a contract to purchase the right to benefit from something, from a person. So you're not buying the thing, but what you're buying is you're buying the right to benefit from it. All right, well, the right of attaining some benefit from that thing. A lease is only valid when the benefits and the price are clearly specified. Now, can someone explain to me why? To prevent abuse, more specifically? To prevent deception. That's it. To prevent deception, right? Okay, and the deception arises from uncertainty. Thank you. Okay, so uncertainty and deception. So you have to clarify what is the price going to be, and you have to clarify what is the specified rights that the person is going to get. So the benefit may be specified. So how do you specify what the benefit is? What is the exact details of the benefit? You can specify a benefit through duration. So you specify the duration, like for example, I'm going to rent this property to you for a period of 1 year. So the duration is specified, that's more than enough. You don't need more details than that. Or you can specify through usage. So I'm going to rent you this car and you can only drive it 1,000 miles. It doesn't matter how long it takes, you get 1,000 miles and that's the maximum you're going to be getting. Or you hire a driver. And you hire a driver rather than for time, you hire him for amount of miles to travel. You say, well, there's a traffic jam. There's traffic on the freeway. That's not my problem. It's your problem. I hired you for miles. So it has to be very clear as to, are we talking about time? Are we talking about specific type of usage? Are we talking about both? All of these things make a difference, right? So it should be specified as much as possible. If the lessor is the one who's giving the lease, right? If the lessor stipulates a condition, and he says, I have a condition before I give you my item, and this condition may affect the product, right? Such as saying, for example, okay, you rent somebody a car. You say, I'm gonna lease this car to you, but you're not allowed to let anyone who's smoking into this car, because it's gonna damage the car, right? Does smoking damage a car? Absolutely, right? The value goes down and you can get third-hand smoke cancer, which is proven now that it can cause cancer as well. So that condition has to be upheld. So if somebody puts that in the clause, you have to abide by that condition when you're leasing something out. So now let's take another example of a condition that you don't need to uphold. So you put a condition and says, look, I'm going to rent you this house for a period of 1 year, and you and your son can reside in the house. But I do not want more occupants. I do not want you to exceed the number of occupants in this house. So, usually contracts are very fixed, but we're talking about very casual contracts between friends and all of that, right? So when you have a more casual contract, so as a Muslim, you're thinking, okay, now I wanted to invite my daughter to come and live with me instead of my son, right? Am I allowed to substitute the daughter for the son? Well, you have to look and say, the fact that we specified me and my son living in the house, Does substituting the daughter for the son affect the product in any way whatsoever? No, it doesn't. So you can make a substitution. Does your increasing the number of people to like 10 people living in the house, could it affect the thing? Yes, it can. If you substitute your son for a dog, can it affect the house? Absolutely. So what you're substituting is going to be determined on how it's going to be affecting the product, and that's going to affect your lease. Okay? So if any of the conditions of a lease are violated, the entire contract is invalid. So you break a condition, you broke the lease, and the lease is over. So now, after 1 month, you broke the condition, your lease is terminated, and the person does not need to honor the rest of the 11 months of the contract, whatever you had hired. You do something, I hire you for 100 miles to drive me somewhere, and you light up a cigarette, and you are not allowed to smoke. That is terminated on the spot right there, if they want to, unless they want to continue. It's terminated, and you have no obligation. The person has no obligation to continue the contract with you anymore because you violated one of the conditions of the lease. If there's a detrimental blemish in the product that you've been leased, you have the right to cancel. Okay, so someone says, "Look, I'm gonna lease you my phone for a year." All of a sudden, you get the phone, you're paying the money, you sign the contract and everything, and you say, "You know what? This phone's got a crack in it. I'm not going to take a cracked phone." You say, "Well, you signed the lease." No, you have to return it. So this is the same thing as the sales contract, where if there's a defect in the product, you get the right to do what? Return or cancel, right? The right to return or cancel. So you get that. In sales contracts, you remember that you can stipulate an option to cancel. Remember, you can stipulate an option to provide a period of time where you can cancel. 3-month policy, 3-week policy, 3-day policy, whatever you want. You can do the same thing in the lease. So these are all the conditions of return policies can apply in a lease as well, the same way. And the last thing is, if there's a legitimate excuse that there were unforeseen circumstances that took place. See, when you buy an item or something like that, the whole transaction is done. It's over. In a lease, you're kind of stuck in it for a long period of time, even though it's not your item. So if there are unforeseen circumstances which gives you a legitimate excuse that you're not going to be able to benefit from this lease at all, and it's just a lose-lose situation for you, then in that case, the contract can be canceled or the contract can be invalidated. So let's give you an example. You are someone and you're starting up a business and you have all this merchandise, and you go to a person, you sign a lease for 1 year to rent this building so that you could bring your merchandise in there, start your store, and you're going to start selling, right? And then all of a sudden you sign the lease, and then what happens? All your merchandise catches on fire and burns. Now you're stuck in a lease in a commercial property for an entire year, and you have nothing to sell, and you have no other money. You're stuck there, and there's no benefit for you whatsoever. So in that case, Islamically, you can get out of that lease, and the person who puts you in that building should honor and remove that contract from you and not get you stuck in that lease. That's your problem. Your products are damaged, that's not my problem. Likewise, the opposite can work. So someone is you lease out a property to somebody, and then they're using that property, and all of a sudden you go completely bankrupt and you owe people money. So what do? You have no money, you have nothing, you need to sell this building. So either you're gonna ask the person to leave, get out of the lease contract. If they want to buy it, great, they can buy it, or you get out of this lease so you can go and sell it to somebody else. So basically what it means is, if there are unforeseen circumstances, you don't lock somebody into a lease where they're going to be harmed now because those circumstances didn't exist when they were signing the lease. Okay? All right. No. This doesn't have to be written. This is Islamic principle. Islamic principle is that you don't hold people accountable for things like that. Anything that's written in the lease is gonna work. So generally, it's better to write something like this. If you're a lawyer, you know to write like 50-page contracts to make sure that everything is taken care of. The next thing is liability of employees. So this comes under the category of ijara, or leasing or renting, because in books of Islamic law, they consider workers is like being leased out as well. So they put them in the same category in terms of your hiring. So lease or hire, ijara, applies to workers. They're called ajir also in Arabic. So what is the liability of an employee that you hire? So like say so technically when you say employee, you hire a taxi driver. He's your temporary employee, right? He's going to be driving you around. So what are the liabilities of these employees? If someone is hired for a job, they become liable for all the mistakes or the negligence that's due to their work or that's due to the loss of their products in their possession. So it's their responsibility. They're going to be held accountable. So for example, if you hire a tailor, right, to go and stitch your clothing, to make some garment for you, and all of a sudden you buy this really nice material and you give it to them, and then they're going and they're stitching, and all of a sudden they cut off one sleeve. Now the whole material is ruined. You cannot make, that material is gone, because you cannot make another garment unless you buy exactly, that entire piece of garment that's going to be able to fit you again. Now whose responsibility is that? It's their responsibility, because it was in their possession. They were hired to do a job, and they messed up your product that you had given them to work on. So who's accountable? They're accountable. Okay, so that's one thing. And also there's a lot of talk, in books about surgeons and all of that. If they make a cut in the wrong place, or they cut a little bit too deep, and they kill somebody. This is actually in old books, because medical science was very advanced in the Muslim world. So if you make a wrong cut and you did it this way and the person dies, now are you held accountable such that you killed the person? Are you going to get retaliation back on you, capital punishment? So anyways, we're not going to cover that, because today if you're a doctor, you get like this super $1 million insurance policy, so you don't have to deal with it yourself. When the job is finished, so once the job is finished, when do you return the product? So you're a tailor and you're making clothing, right? So the job is done now. The person gave you the material, you just stitched it, but the material belongs to the other person. It's not your material. Are you allowed to keep it in your possession until they pay you? Or are you obligated to give them back their product and they're saying, look, I'm going to pay you later? So the question is, who owns this thing now? It's all about ownership. Before they gave it to you, the ownership belonged to you. And now that they've stitched it up, the ownership is somewhat kind of blurred, right? The line is blurred. So what happens now? In this case, what you do is, if the job is finished and the work has a visible effect on the item, like a dry cleaning business, you cleaned it, you stitched it, whatever, they are allowed to retain the item until they receive payment, if there's a visible effect on the item. If there's no visible effect on the item, they cannot retain the item. So let's say, for example, someone says, I'm going to drive you, across the country, and they use your car, all right? And then all of a sudden, when they get this, until you pay me, I'm not giving you this car back. They cannot keep your car because there was no visible effect on the item, and it's your car at the end of the day. So even if you don't pay them, that doesn't mean that they can take your car, because they weren't working on the car in particular. But if they were repairing your car and there's a visible effect now, this all has to do with judgment. So if you were to go to a judge, you would want one person to be in charge of the item so that you can prove that you've done some work. Okay, so that's pretty much the right when it comes to employee liabilities. Dry cleaning, because your clothes were dirty and wrinkled, and when you went there, they cleaned them and they straightened them. The effect is visible on the garments. So until you pay them, they're allowed to keep your clothes. Because otherwise, you can just take it and say, well, no, you didn't do a very good job, and you're already wearing it 3 days later. You say, well, you can't prove now. You can't prove anymore that I did my job properly. So how do you take it to a court and say that I did my job and this and that? So it becomes a problem. So you're allowed to keep it in that case. Okay, the next is preemption. It's called shufa'a. Shufa'a, preemption, basically means it's the right to purchase something before another person can purchase it. Right? So that's what preemption means, and I'll give you more details, but just give you a simple example, right? So I'm selling this, right? And I say, you know what? This is $50, and there's 3 people in line and they all want it. Who gets first right? That's the question, right? So that's what preemption means. If I say, you know what? No, this brother, he gets number 1 priority. And he said, no, I'll give you $60 for it. So it doesn't matter. He gets number one priority. That's called preemption. Okay? So when does this apply? And why would it apply? It applies for 3 groups of people only. The first group, the first person is the one who's a partner in the actual object of sale itself. So for example, I own 50% of this and someone else owns 50% of this. Okay? And now I decide, you know what, I'm going to sell this. Right? I want to go ahead and sell something like this. Who gets first priority to buy it? My partner, because he already owns 50% of it. So they get priority number one. Okay? But it only applies in items where the portion of ownership is not clearly defined. Okay? So I want you to understand this. So let's say, for example, I have a partnership. These are very, mundane examples, but I have a partnership with Jamil. Both of us, we have a bag of dates, right? And he owns 50%, I own 50%, right? Now, it's pretty much, if all the dates are the same, it's pretty clearly defined that, you know what, okay, your half of the bag of dates are on this side, and my half of the bag of dates are on this side, and you can measure them out and split it in no problem. But if we own this thing together, right? Now we got a problem, right? Which part do you own? Well, so I own this button. No. You own this button and this one, and I own this one, and you can't separate it, right? The entire thing comes as one package. So we own 50-50, but it cannot be separated out. In that case, he gets the right of preemption. Otherwise, in the bag of dates or something like that, he will not get preemption. So if you own a piece of land, for example, or you own a house 50-50, you cannot say, well, you own the upper floor and I own the lower floor. You say, no, you own the left side of the house and I own the right side of the house, including the kitchen. You say, no, okay, we all own each room half and half. You own half the kitchen and I own half the master bedroom, you own half the master bedroom. You can't do that, right? So it's not going to work that way. There's going to be a problem. So if we're talking about an item like this, if there's ownership, the owner gets number one priority to purchase the item before that item can be sold to somebody else. Okay? So that's number one. So you have a piece of land and you want to sell half of the land, for example, to your share of the land. You have to give priority to your partner, number one. Number two priority, the first person says, I don't want it. I don't got the money or I'm not interested. You can sell your half, whatever you like. So you go ahead and you give priority number two. It belongs to the partner who owns a right on the object. So the difference between owning the object and owning a right on the object, like sale and lease. Lease is to buy a right to the property. So let's take an example. You own a piece of land and somebody else owns, they bought from you the right of crossing through that land. Like this, imagine it's a huge piece of land. No one's allowed, it says do not trespass private property. But you bought from them the right to drive through at least, because it's a shortcut for you. So you're allowed to drive through that land, a huge, massive piece of land. So you own a right now to that property. You get second preference in terms of preemption of buying that property if it's for sale, if you decide to put it up for sale. Because otherwise, what's going to happen? If there's a new owner, the new owner may try to take away your right or not give you your right properly, or just hassle or argue with you or whatever it is, so there's a problem. That's number two. Number three is a neighbor. Direct neighbor who's literally adjacent. Like let's say you're selling your house, directly adjacent to your house would be your neighbor. That person has the first right of buying your property, such that there's no division between the two of you. Now the question is, why do these three people have the right? Because they would be harmed, potentially they could be harmed by a new owner. So a new owner comes in and starts messing up, and the trees start going all over the place, and dog jumping over into your lawn. It's going to affect you. So they get the right of preemption. Now what is the right of preemption? All it means is that they get the first opportunity to buy, but based upon the selling price that you're putting, not based upon the selling price that they ask for. So if you decide, I'm selling my house for 500,000, this is the market price, the first person you have to offer it to is this person, right? Your partner or your neighbor or whatever it is along those lines. If they want to buy it, great. If they don't want to buy it, it goes to the next person, goes to the next person. If none of them want to buy it, you sell it to whoever you want. Usually preemption only happens, you don't have to go and offer it to them. Generally, you don't have to go and offer and say, would you like to buy this? Preemption usually happens when you go and you sell something, and then that person said, hey, I had a right to this. For your partner, you go and you sell, half of this. You say, hey, I had a right to that device. And you say, well, here's your 50% of the money. No, I don't want 50% of the money. I wanted that item. I didn't care about the money. I wanted the item itself. So you went and sold it. You take the person to court. So usually preemption occurs in court cases where you're basically telling the judge, this guy sold it without my explicit permission. The judge can take the contract back, cancel that sales contract, and give opportunity for the one who wants preemption to actually purchase it, because they're the one who's going to be affected by it. Okay? So three categories. Owner to the right, and the neighbor. You can waive your right to preemption. See, I don't want to buy it. It goes to the next person. And it's going to directly affect these people. That's why. Partnership, what's known as sharika. So when you have a partnership with somebody else, you go into business with one or more people, that's considered partnership. So you jointly own a physical object or something like that. In that case, there's a few rights that you have. Among the rights that you have is you need permission of the partner in order to sell his share. So you cannot sell, so let's say, back to the date example. Jamil owns half the bag of dates and I own the other half. I cannot sell his share of the thing and say, oh, I'm going to give you the money. Because you don't have the right to go ahead and just sell something like that. Right? So that's one of the rights. There are different types of partnerships. This is a contractual partnership, meaning that you've gone into business with somebody else or you own something jointly. There's two main types. One of them is called an unlimited partnership. This used to happen in the past. This is very uncommon today. I would not recommend ever going into an unlimited partnership, what's known as mufawada. Okay, it's not the best idea, but some people do it. And then there's, we'll talk about that. So there's unlimited partnership is when people agree that all of their wealth, you only do this with family members generally, or tribes used to do this regularly. So you agree that all of your wealth is going to be shared, your ability to transact is going to be shared, and your debt is going to be shared. So let's say 3 people get together and say, we are full unlimited partners. All of our wealth is going to be shared together. Anything we buy, it goes into this pool. That also gives them the right that I can go ahead and take a loan from somebody else, and the loan is binding on all of us. And I can also go and sell some stuff from our merchandise, and there's nothing you can do about that. That's usually the type of what we call unlimited partnership. Everyone has, in unlimited partnership, everyone has the power of agency and the responsibility of surety, which is two topics we're going to cover next week. But I'll just give you a little bit hint at what it is. Agency means that you appoint somebody else on your behalf. So if you're in an unlimited partnership and you appoint somebody else on your behalf, what that means is all of you in the partnership have appointed the other person. Surety basically means you stand responsible for what the other person has done. So you're going to be held accountable for what they've done. So that's unlimited partnership. Okay, that's another one that got thrown in there that probably you're never going to see in your life, but it happens. And the unlimited partnership gets canceled the moment one person gets extra wealth privately or inherits money or something like that. That's not going to be shared across the board. Then now it's not a business partnership. It's not unlimited. It becomes a limited partnership. Okay. Now let's talk about limited partnership. This is the normal standard type of partnership that people engage in, and this is called the inan, partnership of inan. So this limited partnership is whatever you put into the contract, that's what's going to happen. You decide what level of partnership you want to have. So you can make some choices. The choices are, for example, you say, I'm going to give you the power of agency, but I'm not going to give you the power of surety. Agency means that you can go ahead and appoint somebody else on my behalf to go and, so let's say we own this jointly, right? So I go to Brother Muhammad and I say, you know what? I want you to sell this for a good price for me. Right? If you put in the contract with your partner that we have the power of agency, which means that I abide by whatever decision you choose to assign an agent on our behalf, then you have to honor it. So he can't come to me and say, man, you gave Muhammad the responsibility to sell this thing. That guy doesn't know what he's doing. He sold it for $1. Say, well, that's not my problem because you're my partner, and in the partnership contract, we have responsibility of agency. If you choose a guy to sell on our behalf, it counts as our sale. And if I choose a guy to sell on our behalf, it counts as the sale. So you know what? You shouldn't have agreed to be partnership in agency with me. Right? Otherwise, I'd have to go ask your permission every single time. I don't have time to ask your permission every time. We got a lot of transactions to do. So you can throw in agency, you can remove surety, you can throw in surety, you can remove agency. Say, no, you cannot appoint an agent unless, both of us agree. So you can put whatever conditions and stipulations you want to put in a limited partnership. Now, the profits and losses in a partnership, they have to be according to a fixed ratio. Now this is actually very, very important because this has to do with interest. All right? So the profits and losses has to be a fixed ratio of either one of two things. Each partner's contribution or profit from the venture. So what that means is, okay, just using this thing a lot today. So we're partnership, let's say we have a business. I contribute $500 into the business. Somebody else contributes $200 into the business. Right? Now we're going to be selling and buying stuff and everything like that. Now the question is, how do we divide up our profits? Right? What money comes back to me and what money comes back to you? You got two options. Option number one is you take the fixed ratio. It says whatever we put in from our money, we get back the proportion. So we say 5% of our profit that we get is going to go to me, 5% is going to go to you based upon what you contributed in the first place. Right? So let's say 10%. So I put in $500, I get 10% back. So I get $50. You put in only $200. You get 10% back, you only get $20. So it's going to be fixed on that ratio. That's allowed. The second thing that's allowed is two partners put in money into a pool together, and they say, what we're going to do is we're going to split 50-50 based upon the profit. We made $1,000 profit, I get 500, you get $500. 50-50 we split. Are you allowed to do that even though I contributed $500 and you contributed $200? Are you allowed to do that? The percentage is tied to the profit and is not tied to what you contributed. Are you allowed to do that? If you agree, you're allowed to do that. What you're not, so you can fix any proportion. What you're not allowed to do is put a number. Right? You're not allowed to put a number. So I put in $500, you put in $200, and we're going to do some business. And the guy who puts in $200 says, look, man, I'm very happy that you give me $5 back. No matter what happens in the business, I want $5 a month. That's all I want. And the other guy said, okay, 1 month he makes $1,000. Gives the guy $5 and takes $995. Next month he makes $2,000. Here's your $5. I get to keep this money. Are you allowed to do this? You're not. Why are you not allowed to do it? Because the next month you lose money and you say, look, I lost $50. You say, well, that's not my problem. I was guaranteed only $2. You give me my $2, you suffer the loss of $50. Do you know what this is like? This is interest. This is exactly the definition of interest, but reworded and repackaged in another way. So there's so many different ways to repackage interest, and that's why it's very important to understand all the details of these transactions. Okay, so that's allowed, and your ratio can be disparate from the investment. So I said you contribute 500, he contributes 200, we share 50-50 profits. That's allowed. But what's not allowed is a fixed amount that's going to be there, but a fixed ratio is allowed. Okay, but it can't be like an amount like, okay, I'll lose my $2. Yeah, same ratio. Yeah, as long as it's a ratio, profit and loss is going to be shared across the board. So what you can do is you can redistribute based upon the proportion you contributed, or you can redistribute, forget what people, put in the first place. Whatever we make, that's what we're going to talk about now. That's what's going to matter now. That's all it is. So you can do that. So let's say you make $100 profit. This guy put in $200, this guy put in $500. You can redistribute. Say, since you put in 200, you get this much. Since you put in 500, you get this much. It has to be written. So you can do that. Or you can say, you know what? Doesn't matter how much you put. I put in $1 million, you put in $5. We split 50-50. If you agreed to that, you agreed to that. It's fine. You're allowed to do that. Okay? The next type of partnership is a joint venture. What is known as mudaraba, or also known as qirad. There's two terms for it. So joint venture, this is actually very common as well. By the way, we covered ijara, lease, which is another common way of using Islamic finance today, is another form. We covered sharika, partnership, which is another form of Islamic finance. And this is the last form of Islamic finance that people, so it's actually very relevant to today, although we're not getting into the whole housing thing right in detail. You're understanding the essence of the transaction. Right? So joint venture is a profit-sharing partnership where one partner provides the capital and the other partner provides the labor. So say I want to go into business and I'm a really good computer programmer and I can make websites and I can do all this stuff. So, but I have no money. I got nothing. So I find a guy and say, hey, you got money. So we need to make a website. Let's go into business together. I will do the programming and everything. You're going to buy me the Adobe software. You're going to buy me the computer because I don't have a computer. You're going to buy me office space. You're going to go and pay for the advertising of our business. You're going to provide all the money and I'm going to provide the work. So we're going to split it this way. I come with the skills, you come with the money, and we're in a partnership together. This is what's called joint venture, and this is allowed. It's actually quite common. So one partner provides capital, the other one provides a labor or the skills or the expertise or whatever. Same rule applies. The ratio must be fixed rather than a specified amount. If you specified an amount here, then it's like the person is an employee now. He's not a partner anymore. You say, you just pay me $500 a month, I'm happy. Right? Then you're an employee, you're not a partner. So if you're a partner, it has to be fixed amount. If the capital is lost, capital means the investment, the money you put in to start the business. If the capital is lost or the capital is destroyed, what's going to happen? It's considered a deduction from the shared profit. Why this is important? In these type of transactions, if something, like let's say you go into a business, let's say the computers are lost and the office building gets messed up, right? Who's the person who's going to get really mad the most first? The guy, a financer, the guy who invested the money in the first place. The other guy said, man, you're just a programmer. How could you mess up the computer? Or our computer, died, or something happened to it. That was my money. I put in all the money, and all the money I put in, the products we bought, everything is getting messed up. So what's he most likely going to do? Most likely, it's your fault. I gave you the computer, and the computer was in your hands. And I gave you this product to go and sell it, and it was in your hands. This is your responsibility. It should come out of your pocket, not out of my pocket. That's going to be the natural reaction of someone who's investing the money, right? But what you need to realize is, this is not that type of transaction. This is a partnership, right? So when you have a partnership like this, you need to determine what the partnership entails, a ratio. I'm going to get 20% of the profit because I'm the programmer. You're going to get 80% because you're the guy with the money. Or I'm going to, you couldn't do anything without me. I'm super genius programmer. I'm getting 75% and you're just the guy with money. There's other people with money. You get 25%. You fix the ratio, and if anything is lost or destroyed from the capital, it gets deducted from the shared profit. So if I was the genius programmer, I